The last few races haven't been the greatest for Sergio Perez. I mean, considering how well he started the season and the dominance of the RB19, you would have expected him to be less than 53 points behind his teammate in the Drivers' Championship. What happened after his strong performances in Jeddah and Baku? Well, there was that mysterious issue that plagued him during Australia qualifying, and an uncharacteristic crash in Monaco during Q1, which forced him to start from the back of the grid. In Miami, Max somehow came down from P9 to beat him while starting on pole, and in the last 3 races, he's been eliminated in Q2. So, what does this all mean? It means that the FIA are conspiring with Red Bull to sabotage Checo's races in order to help their golden boy Max Verstappen win another championship. Or the simpler version, he's not performing at the same level as his teammate who is currently at the peak of his powers. Ah, right, yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense. I don't know why I never thought of that before. But in all seriousness, the topic of the Red Bull second driver seat has been prevalent for quite some time now. Media outlets and fans alike are always speculating about who will be the next guy to step up to the plate. Ever since Max Verstappen became the number one within the team, nobody, and I mean literally nobody, has been able to consistently match his level of performance over the course of a season. And really, the only driver who's even come close to being outright better than him on the very rare occasion is Sergio Perez. The Mexican built up a great reputation through his performances at Force India, claiming the mantle as king of the midfield. By consistently punching above his weight and getting in and amongst the big 3 teams, he earned himself a second opportunity to fight at the very front of F1. Judging by how his career has progressed at Red Bull, however, one could argue that he's been a bit underwhelming relative to his teammate. But I've also heard people say that Max is simply that much better than Checo and there's not much he can do about it. For me, I'd also add this. I think there's a tendency from fans and media to over-exaggerate certain situations. You know, the good old clickbait headline, that kind of thing. Situations that aren't even exclusive to Perez alone, but pretty much anything any driver does, people typically create a mountain out of a molehill. Now, am I saying we should absolve all public figures of fair criticism even when it's necessary? No. I still think there's a sensible balance to be had. And to be fair, these last few races have seen Checo really struggle to extract performance out of the RB19 like Max. But that doesn't define what he's capable of. It just means that he's more inconsistent. Expecting him to compete with Verstappen in a title fight then is akin to expecting Ferrari to make a good strategy call. I mean, it could happen, but I wouldn't place any bets on it. As shown throughout F1 history, the best driver combos consist of a solid number 1 backed up by a solid number 2. Now, it's definitely a lot more entertaining if teammates are able to compete with each other for championships if there's only one car dominating the field. But generally, that doesn't happen very often. In Red Bull's case of dominance specifically, this is the second driver dynamic we've seen where the performance difference between their 2 guys is night and day. So to get a better perspective of what we're currently seeing, let's compare the 2, because why not? Over the past 52 races up to the Canadian Grand Prix, Sergio has outqualified Max a grand total of, are you ready for this? 9 times. In terms of the number of times he's finished ahead in the race, that number goes up to 10, with Verstappen coming out on top on the other 42 occasions. This means that 83% of the time, the Dutchman outqualifies his teammates, and 81% of the time, he finishes higher up in the Grand Prix. So what was it like with Vettel and Webber? Just to note, I also acknowledge it's not a completely fair comparison, given, 2 different drivers in different eras, but yeah, just hear me out. During their time as teammates, Vettel outqualified Webber 72-22, or 77% of the time, and finished ahead on a Sunday 71% of the time. But these stats don't take into account races where drivers DNF'd, so for context, in a 2-car finish, the head-to-head for Max and Checo is 37-5, a whopping 88%. For Vettel and Webber, it also goes up to 75%, or 57-19. So it's pretty clear that Verstappen currently has a bigger advantage over his teammate than Seb did with his. But there are a lot of factors that play into this, one being the number of years with Red Bull. Upon Checo's arrival, Max had already been with Red Bull for 5 seasons and solidified himself as the clear lead driver. His relationship with the engineers and understanding of the Red Bull's car characteristics were and still remain a massive advantage. This is something I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to evaluating Checo. Mark Webber had already been with Red Bull for 2 years before Vettel came in and beat him for 5 straight seasons. During their first 2 years as teammates, the Australian was a lot closer when it came to races. However, as time went on, the gap only grew, with Vettel finishing ahead in a 2-car finish in every race of 2013. The point I'm trying to make with all this, however, is that Red Bull in general have always had an unusually large imbalance between the performance of their number 1 and number 2 drivers. It's not exclusive to Max, although it is more exaggerated. As for why this is the case, there's been many different arguments made, but I'm interested to know what you guys think. Why is it that there's only one driver who can extract the absolute maximum from the car, while the other driver is on the other end of that extreme? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. As for my thoughts on the matter, I don't think it's down to driver quality. Any driver can look like a hero in the right car, and an amateur in the wrong one. The Daniel Ricciardo case is a prime example of that. Checo in the Racing Point was easily a top 5 driver on the grid, but in the Red Bull, like those who preceded him, he hasn't been anywhere near his peak. The best always adapt to the machinery they're given regardless, which is why the likes of Lewis, Fernando and Max are so consistently difficult to get the best of. I also think that the large performance disparity isn't necessarily tied to Red Bull specifically, as I've heard people suggest. Rather, it's more related to team dynamic. For example, Ferrari had a similar relationship with Alonso and Massa from 2013 to 2010. And as you can see from their head-to-head stats, the performance gap between them was pretty similar to what we're seeing right now with Red Bull. When you have a generational talent driving your car, as a team, you'll want to do everything in your power to ensure that that driver is as comfortable as possible. Ferrari. Sorry, excuse me. Even if it means the guy in the second seat has a lot more peaks and troughs in their performance, you don't want to risk wasting that potential. It's important to acknowledge though that when you're up against such drivers, you can look worse than you actually are. A similar scenario was seen with Hamilton and Bottas, where everyone was unnecessarily overcritical of the Finn, when in reality, he just couldn't match Lewis, which is understandable. He's one of, if not the greatest of all time. But when you're pushing as hard as humanly possible to outperform a driver with ridiculous levels of consistency, it can almost lead you to drive worse than you're capable of. I also think it's interesting how Bottas was so hated when he never missed a Q3 session even once while he was at Mercedes. People kept trying to deny Lewis's ability to always extract the maximum from the Mercedes, resulting in his teammates struggling to beat him. But I digress. Going back to the point about consistency, Max is another one who is the embodiment of that. And for the avoidance of doubt, we're referring to consistently excellent. In 2021, he only finished lower than second once all season, and that was in a race where he sustained damage from an accident that wasn't his fault. In 2020, he also finished off the podium only once, and last year, well, we all know, 15 victories in 22 races is ridiculous. Who's to say that the next person won't be way off the pace as well? Being Max Verstappen's teammate right now could be career-ending. So swapping in a Tsunoda or a Norris, for example, might look like the right call as of now, but it's a different thing entirely actually being in that situation. From what I've seen with Checo, I can't help but feel that putting another driver in that seat would result in similar circumstances. In the right environment, he flourished and caught the attention of the top teams. But now he's in the limelight again, he's being held to a much higher standard, and he should. There's not a single driver out there that wouldn't want to drive the monster that is the RB19. The ideal situation for Red Bull is if they have another driver who can get within close-ish proximity to Verstappen in both qualifying and races, and do it on a consistent basis. It's no good having one weekend where you're amazing and the next you're fighting in the midfield with a dominant car. I know Red Bull will have no problem winning the Constructors' Championship this season because their advantage is just too big for everyone else to overcome. But at some point, if performance does start to converge, Checo's seat may become a topic of discussion. They could potentially bring back Ricciardo given he still has a good relationship with Max and is familiar with everyone at the team. Even though I've heard Tsunoda and Norris be mentioned, to be honest, what Red Bull need the most right now is security and reliability. They've already got that with Verstappen. Now, they just need someone who won't necessarily challenge him for titles, but play a solid supporting role. And I genuinely think that the Australian is the right guy for the job, even though his career kinda fell off at McLaren. He definitely won't be as competitive against the Dutchman as he was back in 2016, 17 and 18. but he'd definitely be able to quickly integrate himself into the team and get closer to the car's performance ceiling if it's to his liking. Anyway, at the moment, that ain't a reality. Checo will be given adequate time to get out of the recent slump in form. However, the pressure is definitely mounting. I want to see him succeed. I want to see Max be challenged. And the man with the best opportunity at doing that is Sergio. The task of beating a guy like Verstappen even once is by no means easy. The dude's consistency alone will drown you to the point where you become a mere shadow of your former self. Confidence in this game is everything, and Checo needs something to rekindle that fire and silence the naysayers. However, do I expect him to mount a title challenge? No, especially considering who he's alongside. From what we've seen this season, there's obviously two guys who stand out as drivers capable of beating Verstappen over the course of a season, but they don't have the machinery underneath them to match the RB19 at the moment. Checo therefore needs to maximize his opportunity, because this sport is extremely unforgiving. I hope you all enjoyed. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you're new to keep up to date with my latest videos in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.